Kirk, you guys have recently launched MCP server. So
Yeah.
you already had APIs, and now
Mm-hmm.
what triggered that, hey, we had to launch and build our own MCP server? What
Yeah.
went through the journey? So this whole scoping, data permissioning, how do you think the developers should think about while they're building their AI agent that is supposed to work on top of their customers' data?
One of the problems we had when people were like, hey, can we use you with Bubble or can we use you with and we'd have to build an integration with each of those kind of no-code tools. Now with MCP, you have a standard. And I think that's, to me, the biggest thing that it exposes to people is a standardized way for no-code and automation tools to work with your product.
Hey, welcome to the Scalekit Podcast. I'm Ravi, one of the co-founders of Scalekit. Scalekit is an identity and authentication infrastructure for AI applications and agents. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Kirk Marple, the founder and CEO of Graphlit, a developer-first platform that transforms unstructured content like emails, transcripts, PDFs, and more into structured, enriched, and searchable knowledge that AI agents can work with. Kirk, very excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Can you tell us more about your founding story of Graphlit? How did you start this journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my first company. And so I had, been at Microsoft, and then I had a company for about 10 years that I bootstrapped and sold in the video transcoding space. So it was a lot of data management, but it was just video, audio, closed captioning, things like that for folks like ESPN. And what happened was after I sold the company, I was working as CTO for a couple different places, and I started to think about this unstructured data platform concept of there wasn't a snowflake for unstructured data 5-7 years ago. And that's really been the origin of how do you automate it? How do you build workflows? And it really dovetailed into AI. I mean, we were doing some computer vision, we were doing a little bit of early text analytics, but now it's just blossomed over the last couple of years with everything you can do these days.
Yeah, so one of the things that I observed is you officially started Graphlit in early 2021,
Yeah.
where maybe the whole AI and agentic apps and LLM maybe not as popular as they are today. So
Yeah.
how did your whole product vision change or the use cases evolve as your journey grew?
Well, it's interesting because I had been working at a company doing drone analytics, so like more image analytics and geospatial. And when we started, I kind of had that choice of do we go platform or do we go application? And we weren't really, it just seemed too early for the platform. Like nobody was building in this space yet. And we were I had asked myself, do we ship an API or do we ship an app? And so we ended up shipping an app that was really, a kind of an organizational tool for the data that you could have your photos of your drone photos, your mobile photos, your inspection PDFs, and it was for people like in construction and for different things that had a geospatial element to it. And it was just, I think partially just too early, where people were like, well, why? We were barely using SharePoint. What is this even for? And I think we were just a little too far ahead of the game. And so what we did is we pivoted 2 years after into Graphlit. And so Graphlit is essentially the platform API. And so we started rebranding, and it was right after kind of ChatGPT came out. And I really saw the vision of, okay, let's allow anyone to build an application like we did. And that's where we have our customers today. So all of them are on the Graphlit API. We had sunset the original application, but now what we can talk about later is, we're actually bringing back the app of what is called Zine. And it's really, that is kind of the culmination of everything kind of coming back together. And so I'm really excited to now have an application that is more of our original vision.
Makes sense. So you started as an application, and then you said, hey, more than the application, the APIs that is actually powering the whole unstructured to structured is more powerful, more useful for a lot more developers. And then you started selling the API itself as a service, and now it's a full circle, right? Now you're coming back to Zine, and then...
Well, that's it. What's been really interesting too is the AI coding kind of wave from the last 3 or 6 months is really a lot of what set it off. And I started it off as it's just a weekend project of how quickly can I build? And I'm not a front end developer. I'm more of a back end platform guy. And I had built the whole API back end pretty much. But I was like, okay, how much could I do? Could I build our old app with Cursor, Claude Code, all these things? And was amazed how fast I could move. And that's really what caused me to be like, okay, well, look, maybe now's the time to bring this back because we can build it so quickly.
Yeah, makes sense. So you spoke about how developers are using today your APIs to convert some of the unstructured data into structured data.
Yep.
And you also spoke about, you promptly started with rich media like images, videos, and then creating CCs and out of that. So today, what are some of the unstructured data sources that your customers use your platform to convert them to structured use cases? And what are some of the use cases that they actually use your platform for to solve, if I want to understand some practical use cases?
I mean, I would say that textual data and audio are probably the two biggest areas. And so audio, we transcribe everything that comes in. So it might be meeting reports or podcasts or things like that. And then, I mean, we do web crawling in the platform. We do, I mean, everything from email to Slack to Notion pages. I mean, basically, we're trying to have very wide breadth of any data source, any data type, anywhere. And that's a good thing. For being around for 4 years. We've had, I mean, time to build up. And I think that's a moat for us where, I mean, it's something where it takes time to do all of those formats really well. But it's also good for our customers that then they're like, oh, can you connect to, I don't know, Intercom or Zendesk or, I mean, whatever. And we're like, okay, yeah, sure. And if we don't, we usually can implement it in a day or two because we have really good patterns for that. And so I think that's a big area of, you got to have your fingers in all the different data sources. You got to be able to bring in sources of any type. And I'd say for the most part, it's still document heavy. It's PDFs, it's web pages. That's like the probably 60, 70% of what people are uploading today. And then audio probably would be the next one down.
So Kirk, one curious question. We talked about converting unstructured data into structured data that is queryable and then, getting answers. But then we're also talking about sources like Slack or Intercom or Zendesk.
Yep.
Do they not fall under structured data sources?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the way we look at it is metadata, like the structured data to us is more tabular data, really. I mean, so it's like, I mean, we're not touching importing a Snowflake table or a SQL table or something like that. But we are very metadata rich in that if you import a calendar event or you import an email, there's a lot of metadata for importance and from and to and subject and that. And we capture that. So we're not just purely the body of a document or an email or something. We're capturing all the metadata. And that's part of my background is just I've been super deep into kind of metadata management, schema management for a number of years. And that's an area that I think we do really well because then we can pivot that and make that searchable. And so from day one, we were doing metadata filtering that was pretty complex. I mean, be like, hey, find me a PDF that mentions this term that's over 5 megabytes and created, I don't know, a year ago. And so, I mean, we capture all of that data to do those kind of searches.
Yeah. And Kirk, again, one follow-up question.
Yeah.
See, whenever we talk about unstructured data across different data sources, I think one thing that always stands out is search. I want to search across my data in, I don't know, Slack or my Google Drive or my videos in YouTube or whatever, right? Beyond search, are there any other use cases that your customers use your platform for?
I mean, I think the search and retrieval is at the heart of everything. I mean, it really comes down to if you're building some kind of chatbot or agent or whatever it is, you have to retrieve the data you ingested. So I see that, I mean, there's this top of the funnel that is how do you get the data in? And then what we do is there's this sort of canonical data model that is burned into our API that's like, it's content of these types and these file types. But then it's all about, well, what do you do with that data? That's the retrieval. And that's where I think you can use it for anything. I mean, you can build a knowledge graph from that data and retrieve the knowledge graph as entities. You can retrieve the original content, like the Slack message, but also you can do things like cluster, say like create histograms of how many Slack messages per hour were we sending. And so you could do analytics. And essentially that's all kind of search and retrieval. But it's what do you want to do with the data afterwards? But then, I mean, we could talk about RAG and that whole side of what you want to do with it. That's really the other part is you're retrieving data to put into LLMs to do something with. But we also have companies that are retrieving data just to provide search. Like they want to filter their own data better and they're not even putting it into an LLM.
Yeah. So I was wondering, where do companies or products like Glean, who are doing enterprise search,
Yeah.
they also ingest a lot of data across different data sources.
Yeah.
Of course, they tag it with certain permissions. This user can access this data. Then they give an employee level search and etc. So how do Graphlit or Glean kind of, are they comparable,
Yeah.
or is there fundamental differences in how the platforms are built?
I think there's overlap. I mean, I think definitely, I mean, we started when we came out with Graphlit as a developer only product. So it's like, okay, here's our API, here's our SDKs, here's a bunch of sample code, go run with it. I think Glean came at it as like, hey, we're a better workplace search. And I mean, they did a really nice job with it's, but if you look at it, they have to have data sources. They have to index them. They have to have parse all the data. And now I think they're opening up their API where it's kind of more a perspective difference, but I think there's definitely overlap for sure. But I think Graphlit itself is way more tuned as a pure developer. It's like Stripe. I mean, it's you're just going to talk the API and not like people don't live in our developer portal and use it on a day-to-day basis.
So if there is someone who wants to build their own Glean for their organization, they can definitely use Graphlit to get most of the work done, and then they can build maybe data sources ingested using our APIs.
Exactly. I mean, it's an easy way to get data in, index it, search it, retrieve it, and we provide a full RAG pipeline that we can, like it's OpenAI's, they have their assistance API, now it's called Responses API. Essentially, we have an LLM API that they can talk to directly. And so we're multi-model in that we can integrate with Anthropic and Gemini and everything. And that's a big value prop for us too, where you in one conversation can flip from O3 to Gemini Pro back to Grok, like Llama, and we handle all of that agnostically.
Wow. I'm assuming you would want your customers to do that depending on either the data source or the use case, whatever they think the model is perfect. They can choose that model for the job. That's great.
And that's a big, I mean, making that a sort of abstracted is, I mean, and Vercel has their AI SDK, which, I mean, there's some overlap there with how they do things. But I think, I mean, our SDK now supports streaming and Zine takes advantage of that new capability in the SDK as well.
It's fantastic. So one other question that I had about Graphlit is there are different data sources that you ingest the data from. I know you spoke about you do a lot of metadata management for the data that is coming in. So is there a lot of use cases that Graphlit customers use Graphlit for searching across these different data sources, creating relationship between them, and then generating some sort of insights out of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of talk about us as like a content management system integrated with LLMs. So you get the basic capabilities of, I mean, hey, you can ingest content, you can, look at it in a list view or a grid view, like you'd see in like an iPhoto or like a Google Drive. And I mean, I think people just want that experience of, okay, how do I get my data in? And it could come from anywhere. It could come from Slack or email or web pages. But then what do you want to do with that? And I think we give them the capability then to put them into collections or filter by time. And then what we say is, okay, once you've organized it, you can either chat with it and just kind of put it in, essentially have a RAG conversation, or one of our big differentiators is publishing. And it's interesting because we had this even before Notebook LM came out from Google, but the idea of summarize the data and then render it as audio, or summarize it and render it as a blog post. And that's a big part of what Graphlit is it's not just RAG, it's not just ingest. It's what do you want to do with the information that you've now curated, and you're going to create derivative works. And that's all in the API today. So you can point it at a bunch of data, summarize it in almost like a MapReduce model where it summarizes each thing individually, reduces them down with another prompt, and you can create like podcasts with it. You can create, morning email summaries, like all that kind of stuff. And then it's, Notebook LM, their big only difference is they can do two voice kind of podcasts. But 11 Labs is coming out with that in this next API, so we'll be able to take advantage of that too. But those are the kind of things. But on data extraction too. The ability to then just export structured JSON from the data that you've captured, we support that as well. And that's really the other big place we see people use it.
Fantastic. So, Kirk, you guys have recently launched MCP server. Not recently anymore. I guess it's been a couple of months since you launched it. So you already had APIs, and now what triggered that hey, we had to launch and build our own MCP server? What went
Yeah.
through the journey?
No, it's interesting. I mean, I think I had seen when the first MCP spec came out. I think it was in November of last year. I talk a lot about like how do people consume the data that they ingest. They consumed it via our API, which is a GraphQL API, but then we had offered code generated SDKs on top. And what we found was, I mean, that was where we got a big uptake where nobody wanted to just use GraphQL. Everybody wants a Python or a Node.js or a .NET SDK. So that when we first came out with Graphlit a couple of years ago, it was like we weren't getting uptake until we released the SDKs. And then everybody's like, okay, cool, this is easy to use. But what we found was, okay, the SDKs were still for developers and they're still for people that, I mean, had to integrate with their app. And I'd been looking into MCP. I'd been actually looking a lot into agent tools, like with Crew AI and with other apps, and how could we integrate our API as a tools layer. And it just wasn't standardized enough yet. I wasn't feeling like, I mean, okay, any work we do would have enough value. And then I think it was March of this year, everything changed. And then it was like within a week or two, MCP was the hot button. And it was just a magical part of the spec had gotten to a good place. The SDKs were there for MCP, and the clients were now consuming MCPs in a way that it could be useful. And it was all just flipped within a couple of weeks. And so literally over a weekend, I built our MCP server. And the nice thing was, I mean, it was on top of our SDK. So it really wasn't, I mean, it's open source too. I mean, people can look at it. It's once I kind of figured out the pattern with it, it wasn't that hard. And it was really, and I had said from day one, don't map API endpoints to MCP tools, map tasks or outcomes to MCP tools. And I'd been saying that from day one, and now it's like everybody's kind of saying it. But that's the way I took it of, oh, okay, well, you want to ingest data from Slack. You want to retrieve sources from anywhere. You want to publish as an audio file. Those are tasks or outcomes that you want to achieve. Make your tools reflect that. And so that's what we released. It was crazy. Like we were early enough that we got listed on the Klein marketplace that first week. And we were getting like 20x the signups like that first week because we were so prominent just from the marketing. But it shows that there was an interest there. I mean, and people want to consume data in a different way. And I mean, we still see the majority of our signups actually related to MCP today, and even several months later. I think that's where I think we're going to see now there's a lot more noise. There's a lot more MCP servers, but I mean, there's not a lot of good ones out there. And there's some vendors have done a really nice job with it, but I think we want to be like a very clean, easy to use MCP server.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you, Kirk, when you said, hey, you can't just build a wrapper on top of your APIs and then call my MCP server is done. Ideally, you would want to think through what tools that you're exposing to the LLMs to make a decision on what actions to be taken instead of just creating one-on-one API endpoint to MCP tool reference and then call it done. I totally agree with you.
And the other is let me say one last thing. Resources. I think resources were really underutilized initially.
Yeah.
I actually built ours just kind of looking at it. It felt like the right thing to do, where what our tools expose are resources of our data model. And it's actually really interesting to see that's kind of become more prominent now, but that's actually the way I designed it because it just felt right. But now that's becoming more the standard.
Yeah. So I know that you mentioned that you did the whole MCP implementation over a weekend. While you went through the experience of actually taking into production, what sort of questions came into your mind? Like, I know we're talking about March of this year. That means the authentication and authorization part of the MCP was not yet completely finalized. Right. So what was your experience like thinking about, hey, it's not really secure. How do I let my customers use API keys as part of the MCP server installation? Like, what thoughts were running in your mind?
I mean, with our SDK, it was basically environment variables. And so you could set these 3 environment variables. Our SDK would create a JWT based on that, and that's what would get passed under the hood. So we were already secure enough that, I mean, it wasn't that hard to configure for using with NPX. So it worked really nicely within Claude Desktop or, I mean, whatever you're using at the time within Klein or Cursor. But what we saw then was, I mean, as the kind of network servers started to become more popular, we actually released an unauthenticated, basically an MCP search engine. That was a little thing I tried called McPoogle, like MCP Oogle. So like kind of a mix of MCP and Google. And it's up now. You can actually use, it's like a RAG over an MCP directory. And it works really nicely, but it was just an unauthenticated remote server. But what I found was with the SSE, it left, if you're on a serverless environment, it leaves those functions running. And it started to get really expensive on Vercel. And because even after 60 seconds, 90 seconds, it would time out. And so that's another area with the new streamable HTTP. And then Vercel even just changed their pricing for how they're pricing that because, I mean, we were eating hundreds of dollars just on this, like not a lot of usage because it was just people would connect and then we'd pay until it timed out on the back end. And so I think we really learned a lot on, okay, what types of remote servers do you want to deploy? And now with Zine, we built in an MCP server into the app. So as part of the app, there's a route for an MCP streamable HTTP route that exposes data. So I think that's another interesting learning experience that we can now create JWTs that we can give to customers and they can share it into another tool and get access to their own data that they've ingested.
Fantastic. Can you tell us more about Zine? Is this the new product that you're launching?
So the new product's it's on waitlist right now, but it should be out, I mean, hopefully within the next week. Basically, the concept is you think iPhoto or Google Photos, everybody's used to just uploading a bunch of stuff. You can search it, you can tag it. There's Claude Desktop, Claude, and like ChatGPT, everything are now MCP clients. And then there's Notebook LM, which is the publishing half. And Zine had this kind of concept that really envisioned or kind of wrapped all of those things originally. And it's an idea that I had like 5 or 6 years ago, where I pull all of my data from my world together, multimedia data, textual data, whatever, organize it, and then reuse it and publish it out for my own learning, for sharing with others. And so Zine essentially has 2 modes. There's a context mode and a chat mode. And it's basically 2 panels that are in the app. You can upload anything. It handles all of your data sources from Google Drive to Notion to whatever, even web scraping. And you can see sort of a grid view, like an iPhoto view of everything you've put into this. You can search over it, and it has a knowledge graph built in, so it extracts all the relationships. Even has a map view, so you can, if you geotag data that you're putting in. And then you have the chat view, which is an MCP-enabled client that you can then chat and ask questions of all your data. And so those are kind of, you go back and forth with managing and organizing your data and using the data. And then it also has all the publishing built in. So you could say, I've now curated a bunch of my information, create me an audio report, create me a blog post, create me a tweet, or even now image generation is built in. So it's kind of like an all-in-one MCP in, MCP out content management server, as well as chat enabled as well. So, and the thing is, it's for everybody. So we kind of called it like Cursor for Everyone, where you may be managing like data for, like, I don't know, your family's, like your kid's sports team, or you could be a sales rep, or you could be a scientific researcher. Like I was talking to my daughter for about, would she have used this in grad school? And it's that kind of research thing. And so we really want to be, it's for everyone, and it lets you integrate the data with LLMs and MC.
Yeah. So one follow-up question, Kirk, is, when you're actually asking your customers to ingest their data to get meaningful insights out of it. So one thing that they're worried about is, hey, am I giving you more access to data than I should have? On the other hand, hey, are you accessing more data than you should, or what I granted you access for, or what I wanted you to access? So this whole scoping, data permissioning, how do you think the developers should think about while they're building their AI agent that is supposed to work on top of their customers' data?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is the data partitioning at the ingestion side and multi-tenancy. So it kind of starts there. So, I mean, we have what we call a project, and that's your domain of the data that gets ingested. And then you can have basically users, which could be human or agentic agent users, that get their own slice of that data. But then there's the flip side is, okay, well, how do I pull in from Slack? How do I pull in from Google Drive? And with OAuth, since we're supporting OAuth, we're going to use the permissions that is actually already embedded in their side of it with the with what they can access through shared folders and Slack channels and things like that. And that's really what I see is that gets you a lot of it. I mean, I can't the agent itself can't access data that the user can't access. But what happens if they lose rights to that data? Like, what if that data actually, they don't access that folder anymore? Currently, we don't delete that data from their project. But I think that's an area that Glean does really well for the true workplace, where it's like, okay, this is a full live sync with all the permissions. And that's an area that, I mean, I think we're more focused on just sort of end user data now rather than workplace data. But I think it's an area that we would have to fill in a bit more of that kind of like essentially getting webhooks when things happen and kind of being a little more of a live sync. But that's where the difference is.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the data sources and then you're getting data in of your, let's say, individual users' data, which is what you're focusing on predominantly, how does the real-time streaming of data ingestion happen? Or is it more like constant polling? Let's say someone wants to push their data from their Gmail, for example. Is it real-time? Is it a constant polling every 15 minutes and things like that?
They can set a polling interval today. And so all of our, what we call our data sources, or internally we call them feeds, can have a recurring period to it. And so every 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. So basically, when you create it, you can pick how often you want to do it. So we aren't currently using webhooks back from the different, because it's not consistent across all the data sources.
Yeah.
But it's something, if somebody needs real time, we could do it. The nice thing is we're a serverless backend. And so we can scale very well and have, I mean, multiple and hundreds of feeds running in parallel across all different data sources. And then essentially it just sends little packets of, okay, go ingest this data. And then we just handle that on serverless functions.
So Kirk, now that we spoke about why you thought everyone should build MCP servers, do you think we have come to a point where people should prioritize building MCP servers over maybe APIs or visual interfaces in their product?
I think it's a really interesting question because I think it becomes another surface area for developers to access. And it's almost, in some sense, it's almost for non-developers, really. I mean, it enables this kind of low code, no code world that is more of a plugin ecosystem that I think it makes it really easy for companies to talk, like, because one of the problems we had when people were like, hey, can we use you with Bubble or can we use you with, and we'd have to build an integration with each of those kind of no code tools. Now with MCP, you have a standard. And I think that's, to me, the biggest thing that it exposes to people is a standardized way for no code and automation tools to work with your product. And so, but it also gives a way that they can start working with it in a no code way and then transition the same data back to a code way. And because it's the same SDK essentially under the hood, the same API. And so they can like get under the hood farther and farther as they're building their app.
Kirk, what are some of the things that you noticed in the MCP spec, either that you want it to be better or different to either build the MCP servers effectively or securely, or consume the MCP servers effectively and securely?
I mean, I think one of the things that's evolved over time that I'm happy with is just the leaning on resources. And I think naturally, I think in an object-oriented kind of way, and I've always kind of been that kind of architect, and I think if you treat resources as the data model of your backend, it is a really nice way to offer kind of reference-based retrieval rather than just by value retrieval of it, giving all the data at once. Yeah. I'm happy they're leaning in more towards that because I think it's going to be a nice way to do that. But the area that it's limited then is you can't search over resources. And so, I mean, you can give a collection of resources back, but there's nothing in the MCP spec, at least the last time I looked, that was like, how do you have basic filtering? And it kind of reminds me then of like you go to OData or some of these standards for data retrieval. I mean, does it need to go all the way down that level of like, do we need like OData for MCP in order to like have standardized data retrieval? And I think that'll be really interesting to see how that evolves over time. I think the tools, work pretty well. The auth is coming together, and I wasn't super worried. I knew it would have to. People would figure it out, and we would just kind of evolve to it. But I think the data modeling is the biggest thing of how people want to use that, and I think that'll evolve hopefully over the rest of this year.
I think MCP predominantly came as, hey, I want to make sure that I want to standardize the tool calling capability than data retrieval as one of the pointed problems that they wanted to solve for. I think that's where the whole tool definition and the tool execution standardization took pretty much center stage. And the rest of the stuff like sampling and resources and prompts, and then they kind of got added in later as more and more people started adopting the protocol itself. Yeah.
I think it was somewhat of what I resonated with was tools and resources first. I haven't even really used much of the rest of it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think going forward, the front end will use MCP servers to get the data, display the UI, and get the things done? Maybe today front end is using a GraphQL API to communicate with it backend. Do you think it's going to change very, very soon in the future?
I mean, I would say that maybe during ideation, an early kind of MVP, kind of getting products together, I think MCP is a good way to kind of mock things up in a way. But I think you lose a lot of control. And so I think most products will need to talk to an SDK or talk to a finer grain API. But I also believe the flip side, where it enables a class of applications that MCP is perfect for. You have a canvas and you have a bunch of MCP servers and tools, and you can create workflows, you can create a lot of different apps. And I really think the vertical MCP client is really where it's going to go to. Is like, I want to have an MCP client targeted at the legal industry or the healthcare or industry. And then you're essentially putting together a bunch of Lego blocks on kind of an MCP enabled canvas. And that's really what we see with Zine as kind of an example of that kind of MCP enabled client. And what we want people to do is say, look, I want to target that at my own vertical. And we'll say, look, okay, here's our MCP server. You can do the exact same thing we did with our SDK and our API. And here's a bunch of sample code. Or something. And so we're trying to figure out, I mean, we may open source like a slice of Zine as a way that says, okay, now you can start building on this.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting take, Kirk. One last question. If there are developers out there who are building their own agents or their own MCP servers, what is one piece of advice that you would want to offer them? Or one thing that you think they should never underestimate, or one thing they should definitely take care of before taking their agent to production?
I mean, it's changing so much. I mean, if you look at, there's standardization on the frameworks, right? There's not standardization. There's more. I mean, there's actually more things happening in the frameworks today, like with Mastra and Agno, and you're seeing like another kind of rebirth of new agent frameworks. And I think make sure your MCP servers work well with this next generation of frameworks, because it seems like I'm seeing a lot of people, if they're going to start building agents, they're not going to use LangChain anymore. They're not going to use LangGraph. They're going to go to Agno or Mastra. And I think I would just be aware of that as kind of a new path to fit into. But also, I think, test your MCPs with I think local MCP, like NPX MCP, is going to go away once the whole auth spec and remote. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more kind of SDKs for MCP to have basically push it to a remote server, like a Vercel for MCP, even though Vercel has their own SDK. I could keep track of that because I think it's going to save a lot of time. But on the other hand, you don't want to get locked in to, that's my concern, is there's a lot of these vendors out there, and I'm not sure if I really want to get locked into one of those vendors right now versus getting locked. I'm already locked into Vercel. Do I want to get locked into a micro vendor below that? So I think, keep track of the auth stuff. The OAuth, I think, like what you guys are doing is, I think, really an area that can get streamlined more. But also, I think the last thing I'll say is think about data modeling. Think about the data you want to expose to the applications using your MCP and try to make it something that is consistent and has like a theme to it so you can expand on that pace.
Yeah. So to summarize, make sure your MCP servers work with different kinds of agentic frameworks, not just the legacy ones, but also the modern ones like Mastra.
Yep.
NPX kind of STDAO based MCP servers are not going to last any longer. So make sure that you're building for the future, make sure that you're building for remote MCP, and then you're following for all the auth related things. And then make sure that you're very conscious about what tools and what resources that you want to expose so the applications that are using these MCP servers can actually make the best use of them and get the best out of your MCP servers.
And I think just really, you got to test on a lot of MCP clients because, they change so often and their capabilities are so different.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kirk. That's a great piece of advice for everyone who is building MCP. And thank you so much for sharing your story and what Graphlit can do to solve a lot of unstructured data problems.
I really appreciate it. No, this is fun. Always great to talk about this kind of stuff.
Thank you so much.